Hi, we're the Cardwells. We have 8 kids, 4 girls and 4 boys.
We have 11 children, 7 daughters and 4 sons.
7 sons and 3 daughters.
7 boys and 4 girls.
9 boys and 3 girls.
We have 10 children, 5 boys, 5 girls.
8 boys and 3 girls.
We have 11 children.
5 girls and 5 boys.
10 children, and we're expecting our 11th in November. 5 girls, 3 boys.
6 boys and 3 girls.
7 girls and 3 boys.
Wow. So this room filled with people is really just a handful of families.
This is a man's world. This is a man's world. But it wouldn't be nothing, nothing without a woman or a girl.
Welcome to another episode of It's a Man's World, the Genesis 3:16 Effect. I'm your host, Haley Rose, curriculum developer at the Anastasis Center for Christian Education and Ministry, where our mission is to proclaim the restorative justice of God and the healing atonement of Jesus. If you're enjoying our content, please remember to like and subscribe and follow the link in the description to check out our website. I am joined once again by Rachel Darnall, our voice of expertise on the intersection of theology and women's issues. Welcome, Rachel.
Hi, Haley. It's so good to be back.
Great to have you back. What are we covering in today's episode?
So today we are tackling the subject of motherhood, which is such a deeply complicated topic.
Yeah, and you and I are both moms, and we're both girl moms, and it is complicated. I mean, on the one hand, you look at your daughters and you're so grateful for the privilege of being their mom. And on the other hand, as a woman, you know what they're in for. They are in for living their whole entire lives in a female body in a fallen world. And, you know, new life comes at a cost. Women are the ones who pay the price.
Yes, and the Bible does not dance around that. I think we like to think that the sexes are more equal than they are. We're always trying to make up for it and say, well, men have difficulties in this way. But the Bible doesn't do a lot of that. Genesis 3:16 says that the woman will have what some English translations will call travail in childbearing. And the word travail is not a word that we see very often anymore, but it's a very specific and appropriate word for this very specific kind of suffering that women have in childbearing. Travail refers not just to suffering and pain, but painful labor. So it refers to the work that is involved with bringing new life into the world. And it's a parallel of that toil that Adam is going to experience working the ground that is now cursed. So it's actually those two instances of toil are the same words in the address to Adam and the address to Eve. So we have two different kinds of labor, and both of them are going to become ways where the man and the woman will try to work their way out of the curse of death instead of trusting in God's salvation.
Let's not forget as well that God also says that the woman's seed is going to crush the serpent. So clearly, childbearing is an important part of God's salvation plan.
Yeah, it is important. But let's take a closer look at Genesis 3:15. In Hebrew as in English, the word seed could be either singular or plural. And we're going to see that same grammatical murkiness in Genesis 16, where God appears to Abraham and he promises that Abraham's seed will inherit the land and the promises. So we have this big question. Is the seed that God is making all these promises about singular or is it plural? Is it all Abraham's biological children, or is it one specific child of promise? Or is it all of Eve's biological children, which would, of course, be the whole human race? Or is it one particular person?
Okay, but does the Bible ever answer that question for us?
Actually, it does. In Galatians 3:16, Paul says, "Now the promises were made to Abraham and his offspring." It does not say "and to offsprings" as of many, but it says "and to your offspring," that is one person who is Christ. So we can say definitively that Jesus is who's being referred to when we're talking about the seed of the woman. He is going to crush the head of the serpent. And there is a sense in which it's plural, which the Bible talks about at other points, because we are united to Christ. So it can be singular or plural. But we have to understand the promised seed as singular before we can understand it as being plural and applying to us.
Okay, so help us apply this to us today.
So, for the purposes of this episode, it's really more about what the application is not. In a blog post from 2014, Nancy Campbell, who is the founder of Above Rubies magazine, says this about Genesis 3:15. "Dear mothers, please understand the power of bringing forth the godly seed from your womb. Every baby that is born is another opportunity to destroy and silence the enemy's evil plans. The more children born to godly families, the more righteousness will fill the land and the more evil will be defeated." Nancy Campbell is one of the architects of something called the Quiverful movement, which we're going to talk about a lot later on. And that quote really well illustrates how even within Christendom, trust in God can be displaced by something that we're going to call the cult of fertility.
Okay, so we need to understand this. Can you tell us more about the cult of fertility?
So, the cult of fertility, I'm defining as anything that places hope and trust in human reproduction instead of in God. And it is one of the oldest and most universal forms of idolatry in human history.
Well, I can see that. There have been fertility cults for as long as there have been women having babies, and a lot of polytheistic religions have a goddess of fertility. So, yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. And as, comparing idolatry to idolatry, it actually makes a lot of logical sense to have a cult around fertility because with death being a part of the picture after the fall, childbearing is a way of prolonging human life beyond the lifespan of a single human being.
Right.
So the woman is going to desire the man, like we've seen in Genesis 3:16, not just for him as a person, but also for his potential to make her a mother. He can give her children who will outlive her, and that is the closest that she is ever going to get to eternal life in this fallen world.
Yeah, it's such a compelling idea. People all over talk about your family is the way that you'll leave a legacy. And the thing about that is it's not really a guarantee. You don't know if your children are going to make the choices that you would make. You don't know if that legacy is yours. Those children that you had are their own people. And however much you think about it and you want to make it happen, they do not exist to carry out your agenda. And you certainly can't enforce that after you die.
Yeah, you absolutely can't. And it falls apart usually within the first generation of trying to do that. But even if they were able to carry out your agenda, you have to be pretty hubristic, pretty arrogant to think that you can fix the world just by getting your kids to be extensions of yourself. It's like if I could just clone myself a million times, that would fix the world. In fact, that is the whole problem. In Genesis 5, it talks about Adam begetting a son in his image. And the next few chapters show that these children who are born in their parents' image are actually characterized by violence. Cain is a murderer. Lamech is a murderer. By the time of Noah, the offspring of Adam and Eve have filled the earth up with violence, according to Genesis 6:11. And the violence has become so bad that God sends this flood to wipe out everyone except for Noah and his family, just so that the human race does not end up murdering itself out of existence.
Yeah, so humans being fruitful and multiply, that's a good thing. But if your babies grow up and kill other people's babies or your other babies, you're not actually fixing the problem of sin by making more of you in theory. You're actually just making it worse. So, today, when we think about the cult of fertility, you might think about The Handmaid's Tale. So the handmaids of The Handmaid's Tale, they get their name from Genesis 30, where Rachel and Leah, the two wives of the patriarch Jacob, used their handmaids, Bilhah and Zilpah, as surrogates. And it's such a messed up story, the one in Genesis 30. Bilhah and Zilpah, they're treated like objects. First, they're raped, and then they have their babies taken away the minute that they're born. We aren't told about how they feel about any of this, but even modern day surrogate mothers who have signed a contract to carry somebody else's baby can have a hard time letting go of that baby that they gave birth to. I can't even imagine how much worse that would be if that pregnancy bearing that baby was something that you were forced into.
Yeah, no kidding. I don't even want to think about that.
Yeah.
And there is a whole backstory to this situation. When Jacob first came to work for Laban, who is the father of Rachel and Leah, he pretty much immediately falls in love with Rachel, who is Laban's youngest daughter. But Laban tricks Jacob into marrying his older daughter, Leah. So Jacob, in the end of the day, ends up marrying both sisters. And this goes as you might expect. It sets off a lifelong rivalry between the two sisters. And each of them is trying to earn Jacob's affection by giving him children. When Rachel and Leah experience infertility, periods of infertility, they solve that problem by giving their maidservants, Bilhah and Zilpah, to Jacob, and Bilhah and Zilpah just end up getting caught in the crosshairs of this big family drama. And just like in The Handmaid's Tale, Rachel and Leah don't see the humanity of these women who are in their power. They just see bodies who are capable of reproducing.
Yeah, I don't think people would recognize that this story is a story about patriarchy because he's not being a domineering stereotypical patriarch. There's one point where Rachel and Leah are bartering over who gets to sleep with him, and Jacob's not even a part of those negotiations.
Yeah. In Genesis 30:16, Jacob comes back from a day's work in the fields, and Leah says to him, basically, you have to sleep with me because I traded mandrakes for a night with you. And Jacob's just like, oh, okay. So it does not look like the stereotypical domineering patriarch.
Yeah, but it is. It is the story about patriarchy because Rachel and Leah are willing to accept a subhuman view of themselves, a view of themselves that doesn't include personal agency. And it doesn't include personal agency for the other women as well to earn Jacob's love and affection. They need to look to a man to provide them with physical and emotional security, and they should be seeking that from God. That's that heart of patriarchy. We have laid the groundwork for this in our previous episodes.
Mm-hmm. They're leveraging their fertility to do this. And it ends up being such a twisted take on marriage and on motherhood.
Yeah, and this family, they're so dysfunctional. Joseph's brothers sell him into slavery. His brothers sell him into slavery, and they really think about killing him. They're seriously thinking about it. Reuben looks like maybe he's a good guy, but he does go back and try to rescue Joseph after his own brothers throw him into a pit. But then we find out later that he slept with Bilhah, his father's concubine, and the mother of two of his brothers.
Yeah, it's really messed up. It's definitely not one big happy family in Jacob's house.
So we've seen how the cult of fertility can wreak havoc on families. But let's spend some time looking at how the cult of fertility interacts with concepts like racism, nationalism, and imperialism.
Yeah. And nothing has helped me understand this more. This is a point where I'm going to let my nerd flag fly high. So my husband and I play a game that is basically like a video game of imperialism. It's called Age of Empires, and if you know, you know.
Yeah.
So you basically you pick a civilization and you play against each other, and you're building an economy and you're building an army and you try to beat the other guys. I'm not very good at it, full disclosure. And the reason why I'm not very good at it is because I have a hard time balancing, you got to build your military and go attack the enemy, but you have to keep on building villagers. If you don't keep on building villagers, your economy will collapse and then you can't make war on other people. And that is real life. If you want to build an empire, if you want to make war, you have to make babies. You have to get your birth rate up. And it takes a lot of manpower to run any economy, but especially a wartime economy, let alone raise an army from that population.
Oh, definitely. This is just basic math, right? And Hitler was somebody who really understood this. And one of the first things that the Third Reich did after rising to power in 1933 was to try to reverse the declining birth rate. And there were financial incentives. The Third Reich automatically improved a 1,000-mark loan to newlywed couples and allowed them to keep 250 marks for each child that they had. There was an aggressive propaganda campaign that glamorized motherhood and family life. And the government also honored particularly fertile women with a Medal of Honor called the Mother's Cross.
And that is so depressing when you think about it. They're giving medals out to women for giving life, for bringing new life into the world, that are exactly like the medals they're handing out to men for going out onto the battlefield and taking life. So it's like the guinea pig on a treadmill. It's just, you're doing all of this to bring life in the world, but with your other hand, you're taking life away.
Yeah, for years, I've said to my friends who talk about this stuff, it's a fertility cult and a death cult. If you think they don't go together, just think a little more and you'll see how it works.
They do. They absolutely do. And this was not just in Germany. We, in America, we like to think, oh, yeah, Nazi stuff, it was just all over there. But a lot of early 20th century policies in America, which regulated immigration, sex and marriage, and even housing and education, were shaped by a new branch of science, I'm using that word loosely, called eugenics.
Yeah, and Hitler was inspired by this American author, Madison Grant, whose 1916 book here, The Passing of the Great Race, helped to popularize eugenic theory in the United States. So if we're thinking about eugenics, Rachel, what's a good working definition of eugenics that we can use in this episode?
So the word eugenics comes from a Greek word meaning well-born. The study of genetics was still very new at this point, and it was not very well understood. So eugenicists operated from a very oversimplified understanding of genetics and heredity. They believed that moral as well as physical traits were hereditary, and that most social problems could just be bred out of the community through selective breeding.
So it's very similar to thinking the Genesis 30 stuff. It's just a way of saying, I'll save the world. I'm going to make a whole bunch of mini-me's. They were trying to do this, but without Jesus version of it. Yeah. So how did the whole eugenics thing work?
So there was a two-pronged approach to eugenics. We often think about eugenics in connection with negative eugenics. And at the very extreme application of that, we have the Holocaust, where you're actually trying to exterminate people who you consider to be unfit. But negative eugenics also would include trying to prevent race mixing, and just lower the fertility rate of groups that you consider to be less fit. Positive eugenics involved efforts to promote higher fertility among the groups that were considered to be superior. And that would be, surprise, surprise, white Anglo-Saxons of a certain socioeconomic class.
I mean, the prefix EU, U means good. So in this case, it's just good genes. It's just a word for white supremacy. That's all it is.
Yeah, it's absolutely just a word for white supremacy. Eugenics took aim at the disabled and the mentally unfit, but there is no question that the race hierarchy was at the center of it.
Yeah, definitely. So let's bring it back to women. How does being obsessed with eugenics with good genes impact women?
If you were a white woman or girl, young women and girls were the particular targets of eugenics propaganda. One of the primary vehicles for distributing eugenic ideas in America was educational material on female health and hygiene, which were, of course, written for girls approaching puberty, or contemplating marriage soon. So, for instance, a 1904 book on sexual health coached teenage girls to think of themselves as future saviors of the race. Listen to how they mix the language of social Darwinism with Christianese. Survival of the fittest is a most merciful provision of nature. For, were it not for its eliminating influences, the world would soon be peopled by swarms of weak, sickly incapables. Don't you see, too, that the law makes you work out your own salvation and so assist in the salvation of mankind?
The salvation of mankind. So, look, if you weren't already convinced that this was a false gospel, there it is right there. The salvation of mankind. Who is it? Is it A, Jesus? Is it B, survival of the fittest? You can see it right there.
Yeah. It's the modern version of a fertility cult, and they just renamed it eugenics.
Yeah.
And you can see the religious syncretism in that quote. Eugenicists routinely employed pseudo-Christian language that obscured eugenics' secular origins. And at least initially, most Christians did not perceive a conflict between these survival of the fittest principles and the Christian theology and ethics. They just thought, yeah, these two can go together.
Yeah. I have to imagine that literally centuries of being discipled into white supremacy. And I'm looking at you, Britain, and imperialism and the Dutch and et cetera, that paved the way for all of this.
Yeah, 100%. It definitely just conditioned people to accept this as, yeah, we've always known this. This is just a scientific basis for it.
Yeah.
Eugenics inspired a passionate interest in women's reproductive choices, as you might imagine, including who they married. So many states had laws prohibiting whites from marrying non-whites to, quote, preserve racial integrity. As late as 1958, interracial couples were being harassed for, quote, unlawful cohabitation. Eugenic theory was also used to rationalize housing and schooling policies that kept whites and blacks segregated. White parents did not even want to give their children the opportunity to meet and fall in love with someone who wasn't white.
Yeah, I don't like that. I mean, I'm a not white person who was married to a white man, and I take that personally. I take that very personally.
As you should. Like it is personal. They're talking about people here. They're talking about you. They're talking about your husband. They're talking about your daughters. Like your daughters are who they were trying to avoid with these laws. And that is just so, I mean, you should be offended. I should be offended. All of us who care about morality should be offended by that.
Absolutely. They're talking about me before I got married. I was already mixed race. White ladies who are trying to say, oh, didn't you want a white baby? It's like, I'm already here. I'm already mixed. I'm from England. One of my grandmothers was white as could be. My cousins are white. One of my children is white. I'm already here. I'm already mixed. What are you going to do about it? I mean, I think we kind of know the answer. I shouldn't be, right? That's kind of the
Yeah.
answer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's the thinking. Um,
hmm
so we can see how the cult of fertility kind of starts off looking good. After all, God wants us to be fruitful and multiply so that his image and his presence will be spread throughout the entire creation. Um, but when reproduction turns into an alternate path to salvation and a weapon of war against other image bearers, it does not spread the presence of God. It just spreads more sin and death. And I think we see that not just in the Bible, but we see it in our own history with the directions that we took with the eugenics movement and the direction that the eugenics movement took in Germany, where it actually ended up with this mass extermination of people on the basis of race.
Yeah.
You see,
the womb is such a powerful weapon. It's a weapon against the enemy. We look across the Islamic world and we see that they are outnumbering us, and they are in many countries taking over those nations without a jihad, just by multiplication.
You've just heard the voice of Nancy Campbell on an NPR interview from March 2009. And as we mentioned earlier, Nancy Campbell is one of the leaders of the Quiverful movement. Quiverful advocates and encourages that Christians should exercise dominion by having large families and homeschooling their children. Most people don't know the term quiverful, but they probably do know about the Quiverful movement's most famous family, the Duggars, star of the reality show 19 Kids and Counting. What she was saying sounds eerily similar to some of the things that we just talked about, Rachel. And you were raised in this movement, and now it's a major part of your research work. What do you think about that clip?
Yeah, it is a prime example of what people both inside and outside of the Quiverful movement will call militant fecundity. And that is pronatalism that is anticipating and preparing for some kind of a conflict, whether it is literal or ideological or both. What they're talking about is usually not like a boots on the ground, tanks and missiles sort of conflict. It is a culture war. For me, militant fecundity is what sets Quiverfulism apart. It's what really defines it. And it separates it from people who just happen to have large families for whatever reason. I know many families who have more than average number of kids who are not quiverful. So it's really not about numbers. It's about this kind of a mindset.
Yeah, yeah. Kevin DeYoung, the pastor of Christ Covenant Church and a council member for the Gospel Coalition, is one of the people leading something of a quiverful renaissance. In a 2020 TGC article entitled, "It's Time for a New Culture War Strategy," he wrote this: "Here's a culture war strategy conservative Christians should get behind. Have more children and disciple them like crazy. Strongly consider having more children than you think you can handle. The future belongs to the fecund. It's time for happy warriors who seek to renew the city and win the culture war by investing in their local church, focusing on the family, and bringing the kingdom to bear on the world, one baby at a time." But this, as we've been saying, this is not really a new strategy, right?
No, it's not. And I had to laugh when I saw the title of that article 5 years ago, because I was born in 1987. As of this recording, I am 37 years old, and I am a quiverful baby. And I'm not even the first baby in my family to be born because my parents decided to go quiverful. Kevin DeYoung is exactly the same age as one of my older sisters, who my parents conceived shortly after deciding to become a Quiverful family. So no, this is not new. Kevin DeYoung did not invent it. And we know how it goes. Like, I am an example. I'm a Quiverful baby. Does it look like I am promoting Quiverful values and like taking those values to the next generation? No, it does not always work that way.
It didn't work. And Kevin DeYoung didn't invent it, even if he's advocating for a renaissance of this. So I think we should understand where it did come from, who invented it, and what are the roots.
So there isn't any one person, of course, who invented Quiverful. It borrows from Catholic sexual ethics, the Victorian cult of true womanhood, which we talked about briefly in our last episode, Christian Reconstructionism, and, as I would argue, eugenic theory. Bill Gothard was definitely an early pioneer of the Quiverful movement, but even before Bill Gothard, R.J. Rushdoony laid the groundwork. So Rushdoony taught that the Christian family was God's primary vehicle for taking dominion, by which he meant Christianizing the world. Michael J. McVicker has written a book on Rushdoony and Christian Reconstructionism, and he says this: Rushdoony's concept of an imperial Christianity spread through dominion families shaped the thinking of a large number of activists in the Christian patriarchy or Quiverful movement. So Bill Gothard and his successors simply combined Rushdoony's idea of dominion families with the historic Catholic position that non-procreative sex acts are illicit. But Quiverful goes actually way beyond the traditional Catholic position, because they even reject NFP, natural family planning, as an acceptable method for limiting family size. Because in Quiverful, it's not just immoral to enjoy sex without being open to conception, it's actually immoral to enjoy marriage without actively pursuing conception.
So you're not allowed to have sex with a spouse who you married unless you're trying to have babies. And you're not allowed to be married unless you're trying to have babies. So what if you just stay single? There were quite a few famous people, like Jesus himself, who stayed single. So what about
or
that?
Bill Gothard stayed single.
True.
But Quiverful, it doesn't outright prohibit singleness, but it is definitely not presented as a viable option, especially for women, because in the Quiverful paradigm, biological reproduction is presented as the primary way of growing the household of faith. So there is nothing that you could do with your life that would be more worthwhile than getting married and having babies. So that means that singleness is always going to be seen as less than. Even if they don't say that explicitly, it has to be true. It's a logical consequence.
Right. So Jesus said, "Go therefore and make disciples of all nations." And evangelism is not just about growing numerically, it's about going out to the world.
Yeah, but a lot of people think that they know better than Jesus did. There's an article that is written by somebody named Lyman Stone, who is a Christian economist, and he says this: the notion of some Christian singles that their singleness will be very useful for the gospel rests on the fundamental assumption that their evangelism as unmarried individuals will be more spiritually fruitful than the discipling of their children, which is a very debatable assumption. In almost every generation of Christians, for almost all of history, fertility has been a much bigger source of new believers than adult evangelism has.
Okay, so you can teach kids about Jesus, but it's kind of simple to think about expanding the kingdom of God is just as simple as getting people to get married and have babies. And that's a wrong frame and lens to look at humanity, to be like, well, how can we get the most people? That's a very empire-minded way of looking at it. It's really hard to go out and find people who we've never met before, and maybe we don't speak their language, and try and convince them about Jesus. But if you make them which nearly anybody can do. Almost anybody can make a person. Then you can tell them anything. That's a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, and it's a very hard life, but in
Mhm.
some ways I think it's actually comfort driven
Oh, yeah.
because you don't have to leave your comfort zone. You don't have to go out into the world
Mhm.
and be around people who make you uncomfortable and are different. You can
Yeah.
just stay in your community and do what the rest of your community is already doing, just
Mhm.
more so. And it does not like it's hard. Like this is a hard life. I don't want to minimize that, but it's not as hard, I think, in a lot of people's minds as it is to actually embrace this radical notion of evangelism and going out to all the nations.
Yeah, it's hard to have babies, but I don't know about you, but my experience of part of my experience of mothering young babies and children was that it was a bit restful in a way. I had a good excuse to sit and nurse and to sit and nurture and to slow down and to chat with some people. It I would choose that for sure over learning a brand new language and culture and going somewhere else. Just have another baby.
Yeah.
I would choose that. It's still hard, but it's a different kind of hard.
Yeah, it's like they say, you choose your hard.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of the appeal too is just the control. You
Oh, yeah.
control the
Mhm.
outcome a lot
Mhm.
more, or at least it gives you the illusion that you can control the outcome a lot more. If you go
Yes.
try to evangelize somebody at a Denny's, like you don't know how that's going to go.
Right.
Probably not well. But
Right.
if you have, like, you know that if you have sex, you're probably going to get pregnant and
Mhm.
have kids, and then you can mold them into what you think they're supposed to be. So it gives you an illusion of control.
Mhm. If you have an intolerance of uncertainty and you're a little uncomfortable going out in the world, but you can have another baby because you already did that 12 times. It's perfect for you in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah. It's a very formula driven approach.
Yeah.
So, as far as I know, this guy, Lyman Stone, is not formally quiverful. I've never heard that about him. But he is appealing to the same kind of logic that in order to encourage people to pursue marriage, Christian couples are just going to make Christian babies and the church will grow. And this is one of the areas that quiverful logic functions in a really similar way to eugenics. You remember back when I was talking about how eugenics was based on a very simplistic understanding of human genetics. And it is the same thing here. Quiverful operates on the assumption that Christian faith and values are hereditary. So here is Mary Pride, who is the author of The Way Home. She says, let's say that Christians are 20% of the US population. If each Christian family had 6 children and the humanists, feminists, and others kept on having an average of 1, then in 20 years there would be 60 of us for every 40 of them. In 40 years, 90% of America would be Christian. This is all without outside evangelism. All we'd have to do is to have children and raise them for Christ.
Straight out of the Bible, right? That's what it says. Jesus said, go out into the world, get married, and have a bunch of babies and stay at home. And you'll outnumber all the rest of them out there. No, he never said that. That is not biblical. He said, go out into the world and seek lost people. You didn't make them. They're already out there.
Yeah, I always say about this that Jesus said, go out and make disciples. He didn't say, go home and make disciples. And that is the fatal flaw of the quiverful movement. It goes against the core principles of Christian evangelism, because seeking to quote unquote win by overwhelming the world with numbers is inherently an aggressive idea. Here's some simple math for you. If you want to win through numbers, it is just as much in your interest to reduce the enemy's numbers as it is to increase your numbers. And this is where things start to get dark really fast, just like they did with eugenics, ultimately leading to the Holocaust. So here's Rick and Jan Hess, who are the authors of A Full Quiver. They say, If there are, say, 8 million Christian couples of childbearing age in the United States, and they each have 6 children, that means that in 20 to 30 years, those 16 million folks will have around 48 million children. With the nation's low birth rate, the high divorce rate, an unmarrying, an anti-child viewpoint, and a debauched nation perhaps unable to slow down the spread of AIDS, we can begin to see what happens politically. A 500 million person boycott of a company which violated God's standards could be very effective, and what a majority in elections the elect would enjoy.
So they're like, hey, so you know about AIDS. That's really bad, right? But there's a good side to AIDS. They'll all die. That's not pro-life. It's not pro-life to be sort of gunning for the death of lots of people of AIDS. And we shouldn't have to say that. This is a perfect encapsulation of retributive justice, right?
Mm-hmm.
Justice for them is about punishment. They didn't listen to Jesus, who was like, go out into all of the world, tell them about me, make the world a better place. They were like, no, we're going to let them die. So why get your hands dirty helping people who have HIV? You can just wait for them to die. That's their punishment. They deserve it, right? That's really messed up.
Yeah, it's really messed up. It's like Jesus said to go out to seek and to save the lost.
Mm-hmm.
And instead they are like circling like vultures, just being like, oh boy, they are all going to get AIDS and they're all just going to die and then we'll inherit the earth.
Yeah, it's imperialism.
It is. It's like religious imperialism.
Mm-hmm.
And it is so transparent that even though they say like we're the ones who value children and the world like hates children and is scared of children, it is so transparent that this is not at bottom about valuing children.
Mm-hmm.
This is about valuing earthly power and children being a vehicle to get to that. In the end of the day, it's not about souls, it is about votes. The cult of fertility is so opposite to the way that the kingdom of heaven works in the Bible. Abraham and Sarah found this out the hard way when they tried to micromanage the promise of God by using Hagar as a surrogate, thinking that just any female body would do to reproduce the child that God had promised. Solomon had 700 wives, 300 concubines. We can only assume that he had a lot of children, which should have translated into dynastic power that would be secured throughout many generations. But that did not stop the 10 tribes from separating from the kingdom of Israel, leaving only 2 to the Davidic line. So these are not guarantees. Jesus said that God is able to raise up sons of Abraham from the stones lying on the ground. John said that the children of God are born, quote, not of blood or of the will of the flesh or of the will of man, but of God. So God does not need women to be living sacrifices or walking wombs to advance his kingdom or to accomplish his salvific purpose in the world.
Absolutely. All right. So who out there is promoting Quiverful right now?
So we have already talked a little bit about Kevin DeYoung, who I would call kind of like soft Quiverful because he's not like hardline on contraception. To his right would be people like Doug Wilson, Vodi Bakum, who are not only pronatal but also anti-contraception. So pretty in line with the classic Quiverful position. And true to form, a lot of these Quiverful teachers are transmitting their cultural agendas to the next generation through their children. So you have Josh Harris. He's the author of I Kissed Dating Goodbye. He is one of Greg Harris's 7 children, and Greg Harris was an early advocate of the homeschooling movement. Joshua Harris, by the way, has since disavowed Christianity. Jasmine Holmes is the daughter of Vodi Bakum. She's now in her 30s, and she has diverged very sharply from her father's positions. But as a 20-year-old, she wrote a book on being a stay-at-home daughter. Nancy Campbell's daughters run a fitness company called Trim Healthy Mama, which they often use as a platform for promoting traditional women's roles to their mostly female audience. The Botkin sisters are the daughters of Jeffrey Botkin, who is a leader in the world of Quiverful and Christian patriarchy. And they promote like stay-at-home daughter kind of stuff. Rachel Jankovic and Rebecca Merkel are the daughters of Doug Wilson. And they both have published books with Canon Press, which is Doug Wilson's publishing house.
Well, let's not forget the Duggars, who we saw at the beginning of this clip. 4 of the Duggar daughters wrote Growing Up Duggar in their early 20s while they were still living at home and still appearing on 19 Kids and Counting.
Mm-hmm. And this is how the Quiverful movement keeps its message in the Christian milieu. They update the aesthetics and they appoint very young, very attractive, and very indoctrinated figureheads who have been groomed for this role literally since infancy.
Yeah, so it's not a perfect system because you're here with me.
Mm-hmm.
You didn't write one of those books. Here you are.
Yeah.
But
yeah, results may vary.
But this isn't going away because there were more books on that screen than there are of you right here.
Yeah. And what often happens, like it happened with Josh Harris and Jasmine Holmes, is that when they're 20, they write the books the movement wants them to, and then they go in a totally different direction. Jasmine Holmes is still a Christian, but she does not promote the same ideas as her parents. But Josh Harris has completely abandoned Christianity. So just because they're saying that in their younger days does not mean they're going to continue doing that.
He pulled his book from production too. Like he pulled it from publication.
Yeah. He wrote a book
and wanted everyone to stop.
Yeah, let me help you if my book hurt you. So he definitely went the opposite direction as an older adult.
Right.
And I think that we can expect to see more of this as Christian nationalism and Christian patriarchy are obviously on the rise with the political right. Quiverful accomplishes a lot of the major agenda points of the Christian far right. It's an investment that they expect to pay off with greater cultural power in the future, but it's also extremely effective at keeping women too busy and too preoccupied to gain financial independence from men or to question male authority.
That's a real stuff right there. When women are busy having babies, you know what? They're busy having babies. They are too tired to figure out what's going on. And that moves us into this discussion about the cost of this lifestyle, this militant fecundity, never-ending babies for women's health and wellness. Now, we're going to start by laying the groundwork here. Motherhood is wonderful. It really is. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I am so glad that I'm a mother, but it's hard, right? And pregnancy, childbirth, all throughout history, even now still, it's not just painful, it is dangerous. The chainsaw was originally an obstetrics tool, a chainsaw, because babies were getting stuck in moms. That is terrifying.
Mm-hmm. And childbirth used to be so dangerous that women would actually write their last will and testament because they were anticipating they very well could die. And the church acknowledged the dangers of childbearing. For hundreds of years, the church performed a rite called the Churching of Women, where the woman in the community would give thanks that God had, quote, preserved her in the great danger of childbirth.
And maternal mortality, thankfully, it is lower today. We have advances in medical technology. We have better diets. Women's pelvises are wider. We have better hygiene. The first doctor who was like, hey, everybody, I think we should wash our hands before we birth babies, went insane because everybody was like, you're crazy. And he went into an insane asylum saying, we should all wash our hands. And he was right. So now we're all washing our hands and it's a lot better. So it got better, but it's still dangerous. We can more easily predict when a woman is likely to have a high-risk pregnancy, but it's not great, even despite having all of these medical interventions. If you have a history of multiple C-sections or preeclampsia, or you've had a premature birth, that is a risk factor. If you have diabetes, if you have an autoimmune disorder, if you have high blood pressure, if you are geriatric pregnancy, which is the terrifyingly not old age of 35, there are risks to the baby and risks to the mother. And there are risks to the father too. There are paternal depressive symptoms that happen in the perinatal time, and there are books written about that. This isn't just about women just need to get it together and just suck it up and have babies. This is a risk to humanity.
Yeah, it's an anti-human movement. And the risks that are involved with childbearing are something that are consistently downplayed by the leaders of the Quiverful movement. So, for example, going back to that book, A Full Quiver by Rick and Jan Hess, they say, if you're too sick to have babies, you're too sick to have sex. On the other hand, the husband may well suspect that the wife's horrible medical problems are overblown either by her or her doctor.
That's incredibly scary. What if, please tell me exactly, what is a husband going to do if he suspects his wife is making up a medical condition to get out of having unprotected sex? Why is he the better judge of a woman's medical condition than an actual doctor or the woman herself who lives inside of her own body 24/7?
It actually gets worse. The authors go on to share this anecdote about a woman who got pregnant while she was literally dying of tuberculosis. And they say that the pregnancy miraculously healed her. Without getting into how medically plausible or implausible that is, which is above my pay grade, they say this exactly one page after saying, if you're too sick to have babies, you're too sick to have sex. So which is it? You're dying and your husband's not going to have sex with you, so you're not going to have babies? Or if your husband has sex with you, even though you're weeks away from dying, you'll miraculously be healed.
Why is a man trying to have sex with a woman who is dying of tuberculosis? I have many questions for the man and very few for the woman. They're just trying to get women to have babies, whether or not it's helpful, whether or not it makes sense. This doesn't have to make sense. This is just, as you said, militant fecundity.
Mm-hmm. And at every turn, they're encouraging couples to mistrust medical advice. They have all kinds of anecdotal stories that, by the way, are not sourced. You cannot double check them, where a doctor advised a woman where a doctor advised a woman not to get pregnant, but she got pregnant anyway, and it was fine.
Yes, and that can happen. Doctors aren't gods that know exactly what's going to happen. That's why the term is a high-risk pregnancy. It's not a guarantee, it's a risk, but you are allowed to make a choice to avoid an unnecessary risk. You are not locked into risking your life, dying, baby dying, children traumatized, husband having trauma, because these two people wrote a stupid book telling you to do it.
Yeah, if we truly value life, we have to value women's lives enough for them to have weight on the scale of making decisions about this stuff. In fact, the Bible encourages us to value our own lives, enough to avoid unnecessary risk. So Proverbs 22:3 says, a prudent person foresees danger and takes precaution. The simpleton goes blindly on and suffers the consequences.
It's so awful. This is supposed to be the most pro-life position. But when it comes to the lives that are already here, they are so careless with actual human women's lives.
Mm-hmm. And I know I keep saying it gets worse, but it gets worse. Like Rick and Jan Hess, Mary Pride assures women that there is really very little risk involved with pregnancy and childbirth in the modern Western world. But she goes on to say this: even if bearing children were as dangerous now as it was in the Middle Ages, when women were willing to do it, that does not prove Christian women should avoid pregnancy. God says through the Apostle Paul, I urge you to offer your bodies as living sacrifices. Why should you and I not honor God with our bodies by having babies? We really ought to honor women with medical problems, diabetes, quadriplegia, arthritis, heart problems, who are willing to serve God with their bodies as mothers. And elsewhere in the same book, she compares high-risk pregnancy to mission work, basically making the argument that, hey, if missionaries go out and they risk life and limb going into these foreign countries and dangerous environments, why shouldn't women do the same? So I am really not exaggerating or being dramatic when I say that women's lives, their very lives, are expendable in the quiverful culture of war. They're just casualties of war.
Yeah, and I have been told this before. I had an idea. I kind of knew that this is what people were doing, but I had never had somebody like try and indoctrinate me directly into it. So I was horrified and delighted when it finally happened to me after I had my second daughter. And I had a very bad C-section, and I had a bladder surgery all at the same time. So I had to have my bladder reconstructed, and I had to have a catheter in for a couple of weeks after I had it. It was really extremely miserable. And the two medical residents who were there at my C-section were visibly traumatized for having done my surgery, and were like, it was just so bad. It was just so bad. And I was like, girl, I know, but now I really know from looking at you. So I had a lady come over to my house just weeks after I had this baby and tell me that she thought I was sinning by not immediately getting pregnant. And the kicker here is that even though I was nursing exclusively all night long, co-sleeping with baby, nursing, should not have been able to get pregnant, I had actually ovulated, and I had a period at 6 weeks postpartum, which I object to and will mount a protest against myself. That was terrible. Women, if you know, you know. It was terrible. So I could have gotten pregnant, but the time where I would have had to have conceived a baby was a time when I literally had a catheter in me, where I was really, really, really immediately postpartum. And I told her all this. I'm like, I could die. And she was like, your husband can get another wife. As if I was stupid and like didn't realize that like some other random woman in the world would have been interchangeable for my children and my husband.
That's so gross.
Yeah.
It's there's no other word for it. That is so gross. And I'm with you on the exclusively breastfeeding and menstruating. Like,
oh no,
I think 2-3 months after my children, I would get my cycle back, and I was exclusively breastfeeding. And I had heard so many times from my mom, who had heard it from quiverful teachers, that like, don't worry about it. If you're breastfeeding, that is God's natural way of, spacing children.
No.
And I'm like, I'm sorry, I don't buy that anymore, because my personal experience tells me otherwise. And the medical community will tell you that too. It's like, yeah, that happens sometimes. It's not a guarantee. It's not birth control.
No, and it would be very dangerous to have a baby that early on. Forget about what could have actually happened to me, which is my uterus certainly would have ruptured and I would have died if I had had a baby that early. And forget about how gross it would have been for my husband to want to do that early on, when we're toddler and baby, and toddler has a stomach flu that time. It was terrible. But think about the nutritional deficits that it takes to grow a whole entire human being in your body. Pregnancy is no joke. It's not just some fun little thing that you do to get cultural cachet in your church where everybody all has like 12 and 13 and 4 billion babies. It's serious, and you don't get to play around with it like that.
Yeah, and the Bible does not make any kind of promise like this, that if you get pregnant over and over and over again with no spaces, you'll be fine. The Bible, there's no promise in the Bible that says that. The Bible says the opposite of that. It says there are difficulties and dangers involved with childbearing. So like, believe the Bible and take it seriously.
Yeah, and I asked myself, is there a retributive justice element to this? Because for centuries, people believed it was immoral for women to take pain relief during childbirth. Because why? Of course, pain in childbirth, that was Eve's punishment for the fall. So in 1591, King James VI of Scotland had a woman named Euphemia MacLean burned alive for asking her midwife for pain relief during childbirth. And the midwife was also executed. So pro-life, right? In 1847, James Simpson was condemned by the church for administering chloroform to a laboring woman. That is a retributive justice approach. If women are suffering in childbirth, don't give them any relief, because that's their punishment. And it's not very hard to get from that to, if women die in childbirth, that's okay. They kind of deserve it just for being a woman.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, Haley, you're a mental health professional, and mental health is something that is certainly affected by childbearing. Tell us what kind of an impact it has on a woman's mental health to get pregnant, to have babies, and to have them over and over and over with no break, no spacing, and just know that this is what you're going to be doing for most of your adult life.
So we have to think about birth trauma. Plenty of women have sexual trauma that makes it hard to give birth. And women are afraid to give birth. It's a scary thing to do. I have done the trauma work with women around fear of birthing, around sexual assault trauma in relation to birthing. To say nothing of postpartum depression, any perinatal depression, because there can be effects 6-7 years later. Perinatal anxiety is a thing. A lot of people have heard of perinatal depression, but not anxiety. Anxiety will ramp up too. Any mental health condition that you have suffered with bipolar disorder, obsessive compulsive disorder, all of these can be heightened in the perinatal period. And that's before, during, and in the months to years after giving birth. And it's not like this is just so easy for women to just get over and take a little antidepressant. It would be great if having a beautiful baby would make you feel oh so happy. But for many women, they are depleted and they are sad and they are lonely. And it can lead to terrible things like postpartum psychosis, which is a medical emergency. That is a call 911, take her to the hospital emergency. And I think it's worth saying again that women experience these impacts and men do not. Men can have their anxiety and PTSD and depression kick up in the perinatal period for sure. But serious things like postpartum psychosis, this is a female thing that we should be aware of, and we should not be so quick to just have babies one after the other after the other.
Yeah. I personally never had postpartum depression, but I have had a very serious bout of anxiety and depression that was hormonally triggered.
Yeah.
And it is easy for me to imagine something like postpartum depression, which is hormonal, getting a woman to a point where she is a danger to herself and others. Like that is not hard for me to believe at all.
Right.
And I hope people don't hear what we're not saying. What we're not saying is that we're trying to discourage women from having babies. We're both mothers, and I know both of us would say that the pain, the trauma, all of it, it's worth it. It's worth it to bring new life into the world.
Yeah.
But we need to understand what women do to deliver life into the world and to respond to that with compassion and also with gratitude.
Absolutely.
Too many people are mistaking sentimentalism for gratitude, and those are not the same things. Take Mother's Day. You know, every year we have this holiday where we buy flowers and cards for our moms so that we can tick the gratitude for my life box off. But if we're honest, the other 364 days, a lot of us feel entitled to women's reproductive labor. Gratitude is always the opposite of entitlement. Those two cannot exist together. Gratitude acknowledges that the giver had a choice. They didn't owe you that gift.
Mm-hmm.
And women's reproductive potential actually echoes the creative power of God.
Yeah.
And God did not have to give us life. And women should not be made to feel like they have to conceive and deliver life either.
And I get that people can be kind of tentatively scared of that idea. Maybe if we don't We don't talk about it flowerly enough. They'll just stop having babies, right? Because who would go through all of that if they weren't kind of convinced to do it? Women aren't going to stop having babies. That's not a thing, right?
Yeah, I don't think women are ever going to stop having babies. In the Bible, it's not men, it's women who are leading the charge to have children and to preserve the family line. Just overwhelmingly, you see it all over the Old Testament. Sarah is the one who initiates Hagar sleeping with Abraham so that they can have a child. Rachel and Leah, who we already talked about. The daughters of Lot get their father drunk and sexually assault him so that their family line can continue. Tamar deceives her father-in-law and gets pregnant by him so that her family line can continue. Hannah prays for a child so passionately that Eli, the priest, comes in and thinks that she's drunk. And you can say, well, there was a lot of social pressure on women back then to have children. It was how they achieved social status. And that is true, and it's part of it. But I think there's more to it than that. Because of the bodies that we live in, women are forced to contend with our procreative potential from an early age, more than men do.
Oh, yeah. I mean, men don't put a lot of thought into the realities of reproduction really until well into adulthood, right? Because they don't really have a reason to. They're not getting a monthly period and going, whoa, I could have a baby. There's my period. It's a period this month and not a baby in 9. They don't ever have to think about that. But maybe they wake up one day and go, oh, if we don't have any more baby humans, there won't be a human race. And maybe then they go into a panic and think they need to like take over and micromanage women's reproduction. And so just last year, JD Vance fearmongered about childless cat ladies, watch out for those on the campaign trail, as if women are not already 10 times more aware of the social implications of our reproductive choices than he is. And with no disrespect to childless cat ladies, they aren't the majority. Even with all of the tools that we have to prevent pregnancy today, the vast majority of women are choosing to become mothers. A 2018 survey found that 86% of American women between 40 and 44 were mothers. And look at all the fertility clinics we have to serve a base of women who are proactively pursuing and paying for the ability to become mothers.
Yeah, I do not buy the idea that the human race is going to go extinct if we don't indoctrinate and coerce women into having babies. Because at the end of the day, bringing new life into the world is worth it. It is worth it for its own sake. Children themselves, not the cultural things that we think we can get through having children, are a blessing from the Lord. And I think that women have a pretty good track record for recognizing that.
Amen. Thanks, Rachel.
But it wouldn't be nothing without a woman or a girl.